The blood-soaked sun sank below the horizon as Penelope Mitchell arrived in Kingfisher, Oklahoma Territory, 1887, with nothing but a small carpet bag and the ghosts of her past trailing behind her like tumbleweeds caught in a dust storm. The wooden sign swinging from the station platform creaked in the wind, announcing her arrival to a town that neither knew nor cared about the woman with haunted eyes stepping onto its soil. Penelope pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, the evening chill seeping through the thin fabric and into her bones. The journey west had depleted most of her meager savings, but Kingfisher represented something she hadn't possessed in years' hope. A chance to disappear, to reinvent herself where nobody knew her name or the circumstances that had forced her to flee Philadelphia. "Miss, you need a place to stay." The station master, an elderly man with whiskers as white as cotton, approached her cautiously. "Town's got a boarding house run by Widow Jenkins, 3 blocks north. Decent place for a lady." "Thank you," Penelope replied, her voice soft but determined. She gathered her belongings and began the walk through town, acutely aware of curious glances from the locals. Kingfisher wasn't large, a main street lined with essential businesses, a church steeple rising above the buildings and scattered houses forming a rough grid. But compared to the cramped tenement she'd fled, it felt expansive, open, and terrifyingly exposed. Widow Jenkins' boarding house stood apart from its neighbors, a 2-story white structure with a wraparound porch and lace curtains in every window. Penelope hesitated at the gate, second-guessing her decision. But the alternative was sleeping at the station, and her body ached for rest after days of hard travel. The widow herself answered the door, a stout woman with sharp eyes that assessed Penelope from bonnet to boots in one swift glance. "Rooms 50 cents a night including breakfast," she announced without preamble. "I run a respectable establishment. No gentlemen callers after 6, no liquor, no commotion." Penelope nodded. "I understand. I'm seeking employment as well. I can sew, cook, keep accounts." "Town's always hiring at the Mercantile," Widow Jenkins replied, accepting Penelope's coins and leading her upstairs. "Mr. Olson can't keep help, too demanding for most, but pays fair." The room was small but clean, a narrow bed with an iron frame, a washstand with a porcelain basin, a small writing desk beneath the window. Better than Penelope had expected. She thanked her hostess and closed the door, finally allowing her shoulders to slump as exhaustion overtook her. She unpacked her meager belongings, 2 dresses besides the one she wore, undergarments, a hairbrush, a small Bible, and a Derringer pistol wrapped carefully in a handkerchief. The weapon had been her father's, the only inheritance she'd managed to salvage. Penelope tucked it beneath her pillow, before washing her face in the basin. In the mirror's reflection, a stranger stared back, a woman of 26, whose eyes belonged to someone much older. Once, she'd been called beautiful, but hardship had carved lines around her mouth and etched wariness into her gaze. She touched the thin scar that ran from behind her right ear down her neck, disappearing beneath her high collar, a permanent reminder of why she could never go back. "This is home now," she whispered to herself. Though the words rang hollow in the empty room, morning arrived with the scent of coffee and bacon drifting up the stairs. Penelope dressed in her second-best gown, navy blue cotton with only one patched tear at the hem, and pinned her dark hair into a simple knot. She needed to make a good impression if she hoped to secure employment. Breakfast was a quiet affair shared with the house's only other boarder, a schoolteacher named Miss Crawford, who offered a brief smile before burying herself in a book. Widow Jenkins provided directions to the Mercantile, along with unsolicited advice about that York boy who ran the place. Took over when his pa died last winter. Young for such responsibility but has a good head on his shoulders. Bit wild in his younger days, riding with that cattle outfit. Settled down some since coming home. Olson's Mercantile occupied a prominent corner of Main Street, its windows displaying everything from cookware to bolts of fabric. A bell jingled cheerfully as Penelope entered, announcing her presence to the empty shop. The interior smelled pleasantly of coffee beans, leather, and beeswax. "Be right with you," called a male voice from the back room. Penelope waited, hands clasped at her waist, taking in the neatly arranged shelves and well-swept floors. The Mercantile was impressively stocked for a frontier town, suggesting a prosperous business. The man who emerged from the storeroom caused Penelope's breath to catch momentarily. He wasn't conventionally handsome, not in the way Eastern gentlemen cultivated with their perfect tailoring and carefully trimmed mustaches. This man was all hard angles and sun-weathered skin, tall with broad shoulders and hands that spoke of physical labor despite the merchant's apron tied around his waist. His eyes were the clear blue of a winter sky, startling against his tanned face. A thin, white scar bisected his left eyebrow, giving him a perpetually quizzical expression. "Morning, madam. Yates York at your service," he smiled, transforming his severe features into something altogether more approachable. "New to Kingfisher." "Penelope Mitchell," she replied, forcing herself to meet his gaze directly. "I arrived yesterday. Mrs. Jenkins mentioned you might be seeking help." Yates leaned against the counter, studying her with undisguised curiosity. "That I am. Last girl quit when her sweetheart proposed. Before that, had a boy who couldn't count change to save his life." He gestured around the store. "Need someone who can keep inventory, handle customers, and manage the books when I'm seeing to deliveries. Can you cipher?" "I was a teacher in Philadelphia before." She stopped abruptly. "Yes, I can keep accounts accurately." If he noticed her hesitation, he didn't comment. "Store opens at 7, closes at 6 half-day Sundays. $5 a week plus room for store supplies if you need it. Trial period of 2 weeks, then we'll see." It was more than fair, better than she'd hoped for. Penelope nodded, relief washing through her. "When would you like me to start?" "No time like the present." Yates untied his apron and held it out to her. "I've got deliveries to make this morning. Show me what you can do with the place." Before she could respond, he was grabbing a list from beside the register and heading for the door. "Oh, and Miss Mitchell." He paused, hand on the latch. "Watch out for old Mrs. Hemphill. She'll try to haggle you down to giving away the store. Stand firm." Then he was gone, leaving Penelope alone in a stranger's business with no instruction beyond a warning about a customer's bargaining tactics. She stared at the apron in her hands, momentarily overwhelmed. Then, squaring her shoulders, she tied it around her waist and moved behind the counter to examine the ledger. The morning passed quickly, Penelope familiarizing herself with the store's layout and pricing while serving a steady stream of curious customers who seemed more interested in assessing the new shopgirl than making purchases. By noon, she'd reorganized the fabric display, restocked the candy jars, and discovered discrepancies in the previous month's accounting that, once corrected, showed the store to be more profitable than the book suggested. Mrs. Hemphill indeed appeared, a tiny woman with shrewd eyes who spent 45 minutes examining every spool of thread before attempting to convince Penelope that Mr. Olson Sr. always gave me a special price. Penelope smiled pleasantly. "I'm certain Mr. York will continue any arrangements his father made, but until he confirms them, I must charge the listed price." The old woman harumphed, but produced the correct change from a purse hidden in her voluminous skirts. Yates returned as Penelope was sweeping the floor, having completed every task she could identify. He stood in the doorway a moment, watching her work, an unreadable expression on his face. "Hired a helper and got the place clean too," he commented, setting down a crate he'd carried in. "Lucky day for me," Penelope straightened, brushing dust from her skirt. "I took the liberty of correcting some errors in last month's ledger. The coal delivery was recorded twice, and Mrs. Turner's credit account was miscalculated." He raised that scarred eyebrow. "Is that so?" Moving behind the counter, he flipped open the book, scanning her neat notations. When he looked up, respect had replaced his casual amusement. "You've got a good eye, Miss Mitchell. Better than mine for numbers, clearly." "You're a merchant, not an accountant," she replied. "Though you should be checking your books more carefully. Your profits are better than they appeared." A genuine smile spread across his face. "Hired you half a day ago and already you're making me money and telling me my business." He extended his hand. "Welcome to Olson's. Something tells me this arrangement will work out just fine." His hand was warm and calloused against hers, the grip firm but not overpowering. For the first time since stepping off the train, Penelope felt the knot in her chest loosen slightly. Perhaps Kingfisher would indeed provide the sanctuary she sought. The next weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Penelope arrived early each morning to sweep the boardwalk and polish the store windows. Yates brought fresh coffee and occasionally sweet rolls from the bakery. They worked well together, his easy manner with customers complementing her efficiency with orders and accounts. She learned his father had built the business from nothing, expanding from a simple trading post to the substantial mercantile it now was. Yates had left at 18 to find adventure with a cattle outfit, returning only when his father's health began failing. He'd been running the store alone for 8 months and admitted freely he'd nearly run it into the ground before hiring her. "Numbers swim before my eyes," he confessed one quiet afternoon. "Pa could look at a column of figures and add them in his head. I'd rather be on horseback any day." "Yet you stay," Penelope observed, carefully recording a shipment of canned goods. It was his life's work. Yates shrugged, but she could see the weight of responsibility in the set of his shoulders. "Couldn't let it fail. Town needs this place." She understood duty, the obligations that bound one to paths not freely chosen. It made her wonder what dreams he'd abandoned to honor his father's legacy. In turn, Yates seemed content to let Penelope maintain her privacy. He never pressed when conversation veered toward her past, accepting the vague explanations she offered about seeking a change after her parents' deaths. If he noticed how she startled at sudden movements, or tensed when certain customers, particularly well-dressed men with cultured accents, entered the store, he made no comment. July brought scorching heat that transformed Kingfisher into a shimmering mirage by midday. The store became stifling despite opened windows and doors. Customers grew irritable, children fussy. By closing time one particularly brutal Friday, Penelope's dress clung damply to her back, and her head throbbed from hours of squinting at inventory lists in the inadequate light. "You look about done in," Yates observed as he locked the cash box. "I'm fine," she insisted, though the thought of the stuffy attic room awaiting her at the boarding house held little appeal. "Nonsense. It's too hot for human habitation." He hung the closed sign with a decisive movement. "River's cool this time of evening. Half the town will be down there. Come along." "I couldn't possibly," Penelope began, alarmed at the suggestion. "Not asking you to swim in your drawers," he said with a chuckle. "Folks just sit on the banks, dangle their feet in. Perfectly respectable. Widow Jenkins herself goes on Sundays." The mention of her landlady's approval did little to settle Penelope's nerves, but the prospect of cool water against her skin proved too tempting to resist. She relented, following Yates down the dusty street and along a well-worn path that led to a bend in the Cimarron River where the current slowed and the banks sloped gently to the water. True to his word, several families were already gathered, children splashing in the shallows while adults conversed in the shade of cottonwood trees. Yates found an unoccupied spot downstream, spreading a handkerchief on a flat rock for Penelope before sitting beside it. "Go ahead," he encouraged. "Water feels like heaven." After a moment's hesitation, she unlaced her boots and rolled her stockings down, conscious of maintaining propriety despite the casual atmosphere. The first touch of water against her overheated skin drew an involuntary sigh of pleasure. The river flowed cool and gentle around her ankles, soothing away the day's fatigue. "Told you," Yates said, having already rolled his trousers to the knee and submerged his own feet. He leaned back on his hands, face tilted to catch the last rays of sunlight. Best medicine for summer madness. Penelope found herself studying him when she thought he wasn't looking the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the relaxed set of his shoulders so different from his usual alert posture in the store. He seemed younger here, unburdened by ledgers and inventory. "You're staring, Miss Mitchell," he said without opening his eyes, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Heat that had nothing to do with the weather rushed to her cheeks. "I was just thinking. Dangerous pastime." He opened one eye, regarding her with lazy amusement. "Care to share those thoughts?" "I was wondering who you were before the mercantile," she admitted. "You don't seem born to shopkeeping." The question seemed to surprise him. He sat up straighter, absently rubbing the scar through his eyebrow. "Suppose I wasn't. Wanted to see what lay beyond the horizon. Drove cattle up to Dodge, worked as a scout for the Army a spell, tried my hand at hunting buffalo until they were nearly gone." His expression grew distant. "Lived wild and free, or thought I was free anyway. What changed?" "Got word Pa was ailing. Came home thinking I'd stay a month, help him through a rough patch." Yates picked up a stone, turning it over in his hands. "Never left. Needed me more than I needed the horizon, I reckon." Penelope nodded, understanding the responsibility of caring for family. "You must miss it sometimes, the open country. Some days more than others." He skipped the stone across the water's surface. "Still get out when I can. Keep a good horse at the livery." After a pause, he added, "You could come riding sometime. Country's pretty this time of year." The invitation hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond a simple outing. Penelope looked away, focusing on the water swirling around her ankles. "I don't ride. Could teach you. Nothing to it once you get the hang." "I should be getting back," she said abruptly, withdrawing her feet from the river. "Mrs. Jenkins expects boarders by supper time." Disappointment flickered across his features, but he didn't press. "Course, didn't mean to keep you." The walk back to town passed in awkward silence, Penelope painfully aware that she'd created the discomfort between them. At the boarding house gate, she paused. "Thank you for showing me the river," she said formally. "It was refreshing." Yates studied her face, his expression thoughtful. "You're running from something, Miss Mitchell, or someone. Have been since you stepped off that train," her heart stuttered. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't need to know your business. Just want you to know that Kingfisher's a good town with good people, whatever brought you here." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "You're safe now." The simple declaration nearly undid her. Penelope clutched the gate post, steadying herself against a sudden wave of emotion. "You can't know that," she whispered. "I can, and I do." His voice held absolute conviction. "Good night, Miss Mitchell." She watched him walk away, his tall figure disappearing into the gathering dusk, wondering how a man she barely knew could make her feel both terrified and comforted with the same words. That night, For the first time in months, Penelope dreamed not of pursuit and danger, but of cool river water and the gentle touch of a hand against her own. August brought the county fair to Kingfisher, transforming the sleepy town into a bustling hub of activity. Farmers brought their best livestock, women displayed quilts and preserves, and traveling performers set up tents on the outskirts. The mercantile did brisk business as townsfolk purchased new clothes and sundries for the festivities. "We'll close early Saturday," Yates announced on Thursday morning. "Can't miss the fair." Penelope looked up from the order form she was organizing. "You go ahead. I'll mind the store." "Absolutely not," he declared, leaning across the counter. "You've worked every day since you arrived without complaint. Besides, the whole point of a fair is showing newcomers a good time." His enthusiasm was infectious, and Penelope found herself agreeing despite her reservations about large crowds. Since their evening at the river, a subtle shift had occurred in their relationship, nothing inappropriate, nothing that would raise Widow Jenkins' eyebrows, but a growing ease and familiarity that both comforted and unsettled her. Saturday dawned clear and mild. Penelope chose her best dress, a lavender cotton with white piping she'd carefully mended and refreshed. She arranged her hair more elaborately than usual, securing it with her mother's silver combs, the only jewelry she'd kept after selling the rest for train fare. Yates waited on the boarding house porch, hat in hand, looking surprisingly formal in a clean white shirt and dark waistcoat. His eyebrows rose appreciatively at her appearance. "Miss Mitchell, you'll outshine every young lady at the fair." She flushed at the compliment, aware of Widow Jenkins watching through the curtains. "Hardly that. Shall we go?" The fairgrounds hummed with excitement. Flags and bunting decorated every stall. A band played spirited tunes from a bandstand, and the air was rich with the sense of barbecue, fresh bread, and cinnamon. For a few hours, Penelope allowed herself to be swept up in the simple pleasures, admiring prize pigs, applauding young girls racing in sack races, sampling apple cider and corn fritters. Yates proved an attentive companion, explaining local customs, introducing her to townspeople she hadn't yet met, making her laugh with stories of his own youthful misadventures at past fairs. He kept a respectful distance, but remained protectively close in the thickest crowds. When her hand accidentally brushed his, neither rushed to pull away. "One more thing you need to experience," he said, as afternoon stretched toward evening. "No fair is complete without seeing it from above." He led her to the far edge of the grounds where a hot air balloon tethered to the ground offered rides for 25 cents. Penelope halted, staring at the massive silk envelopes swaying gently in the breeze. "I couldn't possibly." "Perfectly safe," Yates assured her. "Old Josiah there has been flying this balloon for 15 years without dropping a single passenger." The elderly balloonist tipped his hat. "Smooth as silk, miss. Just a gentle float up and down. See the whole territory spread out like a map." Fear warred with curiosity. Penelope had never been one for adventures, even before circumstances forced her into a life of caution. But something about the day, the music, the laughter, Yates's steady presence beside her made her brave. "Very well," she said, surprised at her own daring. Delight transformed Yates's face. He paid Josiah and helped Penelope into the wicker basket with careful hands at her waist. The balloon rose slowly, the ground falling away beneath them, until the fairgrounds resembled a colorful patchwork quilt. Beyond stretched the Oklahoma plains, golden in the late afternoon sun, vast and beautiful. "It's magnificent," Penelope breathed, gripping the edge of the basket. "Worth the fright?" Yates asked, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of him against her side. She nodded, unable to find words for the sensation of floating above the world, seeing the curve of the river and the scattered homesteads and the endless horizon. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt free, untethered from her past, if only for these precious moments. "I've never seen anything so lovely," she whispered. "I have." The softness in his voice drew her gaze from the landscape to his face. He wasn't looking at the view at all. His eyes, serious now, without their usual teasing light, were fixed solely on her. The naked admiration in them sent a shock through her body, followed immediately by cold fear. Penelope turned away, heart pounding. "We should go back down now." The return to earth was accomplished in silence. The easy companionship of earlier replaced by a tension Penelope couldn't bring herself to address. As they walked back toward town in the gathering dusk, Yates finally broke the silence. "I've offended you. I apologize." "You haven't," she replied quickly. "It's not that." "Then what?" He stopped walking, forcing her to face him. "Because something changed up there, and I'd like to understand what." Penelope wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm evening. "Mr. York, Yates," he corrected gently. "After 3 months, surely we can dispense with formalities." "Yates," she conceded, "you've been kind since my arrival, more than kind, but I'm not. I can't be what you might want." Confusion furrowed his brow. "And what do you imagine I want?" "A sweetheart, eventually a wife." She forced the words out, each one painful. "Someone uncomplicated, untouched by scandal." "Have I asked for any of that?" "You will," she insisted. "Men do, and when you learn the truth about me, you'll regret any attachment formed." His expression softened. "Try me." The simple challenge hung in the air between them. Penelope swallowed hard, aware they stood at a crossroads. She could maintain her careful walls, preserve the fragile peace she'd found in Kingfisher, or risk everything on the slim hope that this man might be different from others she'd known. "I'm damaged goods," she warned him, voice barely above a whisper. The cowboy's response was immediate, his calloused fingers gently lifting her chin until their eyes met. "We all have scars worth loving." The simple declaration struck her with the force of a physical blow. Tears she'd held back for months threatened to spill. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand," he urged, his voice low and steady. "Whatever it is, Penelope, it won't change how I see you." A wagon rattled past, reminding her they stood on a public street. "Not here," she said. They walked to the Mercantile in silence. Inside, Yates lit a lamp and drew the blinds before gesturing to the chairs by the small stove, cold and empty during summer months. When they were seated, he waited, patient and attentive, giving her space to find her courage. "I was engaged in Philadelphia," Penelope began, staring at her clasped hands. "Harold Blackwell, son of my father's business partner. The families had planned the match since we were children." Yates remained silent, his only response a slight tightening of his jaw. "Father's shipping business failed after a series of poor investments. Harold's family could have helped, but instead they called in their loans, forcing bankruptcy." The familiar pain of betrayal washed through her. "They bought our assets for pennies on the dollar. My parents lost everything: our home, the business, our standing in society." "And your fiancé," Yates prompted when she paused, "broke the engagement immediately, said he couldn't marry a penniless girl." She laughed bitterly. "That wasn't the worst of it. Father took his own life 3 days later. Mother followed within a month. Heart failure, the doctor called it, but it was grief that killed her." "I'm sorry," Yates said softly. "That's a heavy burden to bear alone." Penelope nodded, gathering strength for the rest. "I had nowhere to go. Harold's father offered me a position as his personal companion." Understanding darkened Yates's expression. "He took advantage of your situation." "For 6 months." she confirmed, voice hollow. Said he'd see me on the streets if I refused him. When I finally gathered the courage to leave, Her hand moved unconsciously to her collar, fingers brushing the scar hidden beneath. He said if he couldn't have me, no decent man would want me either. She unlaced the top buttons of her high collar, pulling it aside to reveal the jagged scar that ran from behind her ear down her neck and disappeared beneath her dress, continuing across her collarbone and shoulder. He used a letter opener, said he was marking me as what I was, ruined goods. Yates's face had gone dangerously still, a muscle ticking in his jaw. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "How did you escape?" I fought back. "The Derringer was in my reticule. I didn't kill him, but I injured him badly enough to flee." The memory of that night still haunted her, the blood, the pain, the terror of running through Philadelphia streets in a torn dress. "I took what money I could find in his desk and bought a ticket west. I've been running ever since. If he finds me—" "He won't," Yates stated with absolute certainty. "And if by some miracle he did, he'd never touch you again." The fierce protectiveness in his voice warmed something long cold inside her. "Now you understand why we can't." She gestured helplessly between them. "No, I don't understand that at all," he replied, leaning forward in his chair. "You survived. You rebuilt your life. There's nothing in what you've told me that changes how I feel, except perhaps to increase my admiration." She stared at him, bewildered by his reaction. "I'm not innocent. Not pure. In the eyes of society hangs society," Yates interrupted, an unexpected edge to his voice. "You think you're the only one carrying marks, the only one with regrets." He unbuttoned his cuff and rolled up his sleeve, revealing a puckered bullet scar on his forearm. "Got this running with a gang after leaving the cattle drive. Was young and stupid, thought outlawing sounded adventurous." Before she could respond, he turned his head, showing a thin white line disappearing into his hairline. "Bar fight in Dodge. Nearly lost an eye." Then he pushed back his chair and unbuttoned his waistcoat. "And this?" He pulled his shirt free, lifting it to reveal a long, jagged scar across his ribs, courtesy of a Comanche warrior who rightfully objected to my presence on his hunting grounds. Penelope stared at the network of scars mapping his torso, telling stories of a life far removed from the respectable shopkeeper he now appeared to be. "My point," Yates said, tucking his shirt back in, "is that none of us reaches adulthood unscarred. Some marks show on our skin, others on our souls. Doesn't make us damaged goods, makes us survivors." He knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. "I'm not the boy who left Kingfisher looking for adventure, made choices I'm not proud of. But those experiences shaped me into the man kneeling before you now." His thumbs traced gentle circles on her palms. "I don't care what happened in Philadelphia, except that it brought you here. I care about the woman who corrects my accounts, soothes difficult customers, and dreams bigger dreams than she allows herself to admit." Tears spilled down Penelope's cheeks, falling unchecked. "I've been afraid for so long," she whispered. "Afraid of being found, afraid of trusting, afraid of hoping for anything beyond mere survival." "Fear keeps us alive," Yates acknowledged, "but it's a poor companion for a lifetime." He reached up, gently brushing a tear from her cheek. "I'm not asking for promises, just a chance. Allow yourself that much." Perhaps it was exhaustion from carrying her burden alone for so long. Perhaps it was the earnestness in his eyes, or the memory of floating above the world, seeing endless possibilities spread before her. Whatever the reason, Penelope found herself nodding, accepting the handkerchief he offered to dry her tears. "A chance," she agreed softly. "Nothing more for now." His smile was like sunrise breaking across the plains. "That's all I ask." The harvest moon hung low over Kingfisher, casting golden light across fields ready for reaping. September brought cooler evenings, county residents preparing for winter, and subtle changes in Penelope's carefully ordered existence. She still worked at the mercantile 6 days a week, maintaining the books with meticulous precision. But now there were evening walks along the river path, Sunday picnics under cottonwood trees, and most significantly riding lessons on Yates's gentle mare, Rosie. "You're a natural," he declared one crisp morning as Penelope guided the horse around the paddock behind the livery stable. "Keep your back straight, that's it." Her initial terror had given way to cautious enjoyment. The sensation of moving in harmony with such a powerful creature was unlike anything she'd experienced, both frightening and exhilarating. "Far cry from a Philadelphia carriage," she admitted, carefully bringing Rosie to a halt beside the fence where Yates leaned, watching her progress. "Ready to try outside the paddock next time? There's a pretty meadow about 2 miles west that's carpeted with late wildflowers." The suggestion both tempted and alarmed her. 2 miles from town meant 2 miles from safety if... She pushed the thought away. No telegrams had arrived inquiring about a woman of her description. No strangers had appeared seeking information. Kingfisher remained her haven. "I'd like that," she decided, accepting his help to dismount. Her boots had barely touched ground when his hands lingered at her waist, their faces suddenly inches apart. They had been careful since her confession, Yates respecting her need for distance, Penelope gradually lowering the walls she'd built around her heart. But there had been moments like this, breath-catching, time suspending, the world narrowing to just the two of them. "Penelope," he murmured, a question in his voice. She answered by closing the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a tentative kiss. His response was gentle, unhurried, hands remaining respectfully at her waist while hers found their way to his shoulders. When they parted, his smile held a touch of wonder. "Been wanting to do that since you reorganized my ledgers," he confessed. A laugh bubbled up, surprising her with its lightness. "That long, and here I thought it was my skill with difficult customers that attracted you." "That too." He tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so tender it made her heart ache. "Everything about you, truth be told." The sound of approaching footsteps broke the moment. They stepped apart, Penelope smoothing her skirts as the livery owner rounded the corner. "Morning, York," the man called. "Got that shipment of grain you were expecting?" "Be right there," Yates replied, then turned back to Penelope. "Sunday." "For the meadow ride," she nodded, still feeling the imprint of his kiss. "Sunday." The rest of the week passed in a pleasant haze, Penelope moving through her duties with an unfamiliar lightness in her step. Even Widow Jenkins remarked on the change, observing that fresh air and good company work wonders for a young woman's complexion. Sunday dawned clear and cool, perfect for riding. Yates arrived at the boarding house with 2 horses, Rosie for Penelope and his own gelding, a sleek chestnut named Copper. They rode west at an easy pace, Penelope growing more confident with each mile. The meadow proved as lovely as promised, rolling land, dotted with late goldenrod and purple asters, bordered by a stand of cottonwoods whose leaves had just begun to turn gold. They picketed the horses near a small creek and spread a blanket in a sunny spot sheltered from the breeze. "Peaceful out here," Yates observed, stretching out beside her. "Sometimes think I should have built outside town instead of taking the rooms above the store." "You've thought of building?" Penelope asked, curious. "Own 80 acres about a mile beyond this meadow." "Pa bought it years back, thinking to farm when he retired from the mercantile." His expression grew wistful. "Never got the chance. Land's just sitting there waiting for someone to make something of it." "What would you build if you could?" He considered the question seriously. Nothing fancy. Solid house with a wide porch, room for horses, maybe an orchard someday. After a pause, he added quietly, space for a family to grow. The simple description painted a picture so vivid Penelope could almost see it: a white farmhouse with curtains at the windows, children running in the yard, a life built on steady love rather than fear. The yearning it awakened surprised her with its intensity. "Would you show me?" she asked impulsively. "Your land," delight transformed his features. "Now, why not? We've come this far." They repacked the picnic and mounted, riding through the meadow toward a distant line of trees. Beyond lay rolling prairie, uncultivated but rich with possibility. Yates pointed out landmarks: a natural spring that never failed even in drought years, a slight rise perfect for a house with views in all directions, a protected hollow where fruit trees would thrive. Penelope listened, captivated not just by the land but by the future he envisioned. For the first time since her parents' deaths, she allowed herself to imagine belonging somewhere permanently, putting down roots instead of remaining poised for flight. They dismounted near the spring, letting the horses drink while they sat on a fallen log. Yates took her hand, his expression turning serious. "Been wanting to ask you something. Wasn't planning on today, but being here." He gestured to the land around them. "Seems right somehow." Penelope's heart began a rapid tattoo against her ribs. "What is it?" "The rooms above the store. They're sitting empty except for storage. Been thinking they'd make a proper apartment with some work: new wallpaper, better stove, maybe a bathtub." He met her eyes directly. "Would you consider moving in as my wife?" Though she'd half anticipated the question, hearing it spoken aloud still stole her breath. "Yates, let me finish," he said gently. "Not asking for an immediate answer. No, it's sudden. But I love you, Penelope, have almost since you stepped into my store. Want to build a life with you here in town at first, then out here when we can manage it." His grip on her hand tightened. "You deserve every happiness. I'd spend my life trying to give you that." Tears blurred her vision. "You can't know what you're asking." "If he ever found me, let him come," Yates said with quiet conviction. "I've faced worse odds. You don't understand. He's powerful, connected. He could ruin us both." "Look around you," he urged, gesturing to the open country. "This isn't Philadelphia, different rules out here. Man threatens what's mine. He answers to me, not some fancy Eastern court." The fierce protectiveness in his voice both comforted and concerned her. "I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me. Nothing's going to happen except us building something good together." He cupped her face in his hands. "Do you love me, Penelope? That's all that matters." Did she love him? The question seemed absurdly simple for such a complex emotion. She loved his kindness, his integrity, the way he looked at her as though her scars made her more beautiful rather than less. She loved his patience, his dreams, his unwavering belief in possibilities. "Yes," she whispered. "God help me, I do love you." His kiss held promise and passion, drawing her closer until she was wrapped in his embrace, the steady beat of his heart against hers. When they parted, his smile outshone the autumn sun. "Then marry me. We'll face whatever comes together." Hope, fragile but persistent, unfurled within her. "Yes," she said, the word both terrifying and liberating. "Yes, I'll marry you." They returned to town as sunset painted the sky in fierce oranges and purples, arriving at the boarding house just as Widow Jenkins was lighting the lamps. The older woman took one look at their clasped hands and knowing smiles and promptly burst into tears. "Knew it the minute you walked into my kitchen," she declared, embracing Penelope. "Girl with shadows in her eyes meets boy who chased the horizon. Perfect sense, the two of you." News traveled with typical small-town efficiency. By morning, Half of Kingfisher had stopped by the mercantile to offer congratulations. Yates accepted them with good-natured humor, while Penelope alternated between blushing pleasure and quiet panic at finding herself suddenly the center of attention. "People will talk," she whispered during a rare moment alone, "about how quickly it's happening." Yates shrugged. "Let them. Minister can marry us next Sunday if you're willing, unless you want a fancy wedding." The thought of delays, of elaborate preparations, increased her anxiety. "No. Simple is better," he nodded, understanding her unspoken fears. "Sunday it is." The week passed in a blur of preparations. Widow Jenkins insisted Penelope needed a proper wedding dress and enlisted the town seamstress to work miracles with ivory silk ordered specially from Oklahoma City. Yates began transforming the rooms above the store, painting walls and installing a new cookstove with help from neighboring shopkeepers. Sunday morning dawned clear and crisp, the prairie stretching vast and golden under an impossibly blue October sky. Penelope stood before the small mirror in her boarding house room, barely recognizing the woman reflected there. The ivory dress with its modest lace trim transformed her, as did the small crown of late roses adorning her dark hair, worn loose down her back at Yates's request. A soft knock preceded Widow Jenkins' entrance. The older woman's eyes immediately welled with tears. "Oh, my dear, you look a vision." "Is it too much?" Penelope asked anxiously, smoothing the unfamiliar silk. "I've never worn anything so fine. It's perfect. And that young man waiting at the church won't know what hit him." She pressed a small package into Penelope's hands. "Something borrowed. Wore these on my own wedding day 30 years ago." The package contained a pair of delicate pearl earrings. Penelope fastened them with trembling fingers, touched beyond words. "Mrs. Jenkins, I don't know how to thank you." "Be happy," the widow replied simply. "That's thanks enough." The small church overflowed with townspeople, many standing along the walls to witness the merchant's marriage to his mysterious shopgirl. Yates waited at the altar, resplendent in a new black suit, his usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion. When Penelope appeared in the doorway, his expression of awestruck adoration banished her last doubts. The ceremony itself passed in a blur, familiar words spoken by the minister, simple gold bands exchanged, Yates's hand steady in hers as they recited their vows. When he kissed her as his wife before the assembled congregation, Penelope felt a chapter closing, the frightened woman who had stepped off the train 6 months earlier fading into memory, replaced by someone stronger, braver, beloved. The reception at the town hall featured a feast contributed by seemingly every household in Kingfisher: roasted beef and chicken, mountains of potatoes, pies of every description. Music from fiddles and a piano encouraged dancing, Yates leading Penelope through a waltz with surprising grace for a former cowboy. "Where did you learn to dance?" she asked as he guided her smoothly around the floor. "Cattle Baron's daughter took a shine to me in Dodge City," he admitted with a grin. "Her father hired a dancing master for all his cowhands, thought it might civilize us enough to be presentable at his fancy parties. Did it work? Not particularly, but the lesson stuck." He drew her closer. "Glad of that now." As evening approached, they slipped away from the celebration, crossing the street to the mercantile where their new home awaited. Yates paused at the door, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "Tradition," he explained, carrying her over the threshold and up the stairs. The transformation of the storage rooms took her breath away. Fresh white paint brightened walls now adorned with simple curtains at the windows. New furniture, a table and chairs, a comfortable settee, a large bed with a colorful quilt filled spaces once cluttered with crates and boxes. Vases of autumn flowers adorned every surface, filling the rooms with their sweet scent. "It's beautiful," she whispered, overwhelmed by the evidence of his care and planning. "Not finished yet," Yates cautioned, setting her gently on her feet. "Still need proper rugs, maybe some pictures, but it's a start." "It's perfect," Penelope insisted, turning to face her husband, the word still new and wondrous in her mind. "Everything is perfect." His kiss held a new urgency, passion no longer restrained by propriety. When he drew back, his eyes had darkened. "Should I? Would you prefer some time alone?" To prepare. The consideration in his question, his willingness to wait despite the desire evident in his expression, cemented her certainty. Penelope reached up, beginning to unpin her hair. "I've waited long enough," she said softly, "for everything." Sunrise found them tangled in the quilt, Penelope's head resting on Yates's chest, his arm curved protectively around her shoulders. Outside, Kingfisher was beginning to stir a wagon rattling down the street, the baker's boy whistling as he made deliveries. "Sleep well, Mrs. York." Yates murmured against her hair. The name, her new name, one chosen rather than inherited or imposed, filled her with quiet joy. "Better than I can remember." His fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, dipping occasionally to the scar that ran across her collarbone. During the night, he had kissed every inch of that mark, his tenderness bringing tears to her eyes. "What happens now?" she asked, reluctant to leave the warmth of their bed but aware of the store waiting below. "Now," Yates stretched contentedly. "Now we live, run the store. Build on that land when we've saved enough. Maybe fill these rooms with children someday, if you're willing." Children. The possibility had seemed so remote in Philadelphia that Penelope had scarcely allowed herself to consider it. Now, secure in her husband's embrace, the future unfurled with countless possibilities. "I'd like that," she said, surprising herself with the certainty of it. "Not immediately, perhaps, but someday." He kissed her forehead. "No rush, have a lifetime ahead of us." The words should have frightened her, such certainty tempting fate. Instead, she found herself believing in that lifetime, in the promise of days stretching before them like the vast Oklahoma prairie. Winter descended on Kingfisher with howling blizzards and temperatures cold enough to freeze the Cimarron River solid. The mercantile became the heart of town life, farmers and ranchers gathering around the stove to exchange news while their wives selected supplies. Penelope's efficiency and Yates's easy manner made the store more profitable than it had been even during his father's time. Their rooms above became a true home, bright with lamplight and warmth, even on the darkest December evenings. Penelope discovered unexpected joy in simple domesticity, cooking meals, arranging dried flowers in vases, falling asleep in her husband's arms with snow pattering against the windows. "Never thought I'd prefer winter to summer," Yates remarked one evening as they sat before the fire, his head in her lap while she read aloud from a novel. "But there's something to be said for being snowbound with the right person." Penelope set aside the book, running her fingers through his hair. "Even when the right person insists on proper bookkeeping and inventory during the slowest months." "Especially then," he assured her, catching her hand to kiss her palm. "Your ruthless organization is keeping us afloat." January sales up 15% from last year. 20%, she corrected with a smile. "I reviewed the numbers again yesterday." His laughter warmed her more thoroughly than the fire. "See, married a financial genius, smartest decision I ever made." As winter yielded to spring, bringing mud season and then the first tender green shoots in fields surrounding town, Penelope found herself increasingly drawn to the land Yates had shown her. They rode out whenever weather permitted, discussing where the house would stand, how many rooms it needed, whether an orchard should be planted to the east or south of the main buildings. "We could start building this summer," Yates suggested as they walked the property one mild April day. "Don't have enough saved for the whole house yet, but could manage the foundation and frame before winter returns." Penelope nodded thoughtfully. "The store profits continue to improve if we're careful with expenses." "Always thinking of the ledger," he teased, pulling her close for a kiss. "But you're right. No sense rushing and doing it poorly." She leaned into his embrace, inhaling the familiar scent of soap and leather that clung to him even after a day behind the counter rather than on horseback. "I want to do it right. Build something that will last." "Like us," he murmured against her hair. May brought wildflowers carpeting the prairie and an unexpected letter that arrived with the Saturday mail coach. Penelope was alone in the store when the postmaster delivered it, Yates having ridden to a neighboring farm to arrange a delivery. "Special delivery for Mrs. York," the postmaster announced, placing an envelope on the counter. "All the way from Philadelphia." The world tilted beneath her feet. Penelope stared at the elegant handwriting, a script she recognized instantly, having seen it on countless business documents in her father's study. Harold Blackwell, S.R., had found her. With trembling hands, she accepted the letter, waiting until the postmaster left before breaking the seal. Inside, a single sheet of expensive paper contained just 3 lines. "My dear Miss Mitchell, or whatever name you now use, your location is known to me. Expect my arrival by month's end to settle our unfinished business. H.B." The room spun around her. Penelope clutched the counter, struggling to breathe through the sudden constriction in her chest. How had he found her? Who had betrayed her whereabouts? The questions multiplied, each more terrifying than the last. Would he bring the law, accusing her of theft or worse? Would he attempt to force her return? Would he seek revenge for the injuries she'd inflicted while escaping? When Yates returned hours later, he found her still behind the counter, pale and hollow-eyed, the letter clutched in her hand. One look at her face told him something was gravely wrong. "Penelope, what's happened?" Wordlessly, she handed him the letter. His expression darkened as he read the brief message, jaw tightening, the scar through his eyebrow standing out white against suddenly flushed skin. "He won't touch you," Yates stated, his voice dangerously calm. "Won't get within 100 yards of you. You don't know him," Penelope whispered. "His influence, his connections. He could have you arrested just on his word against ours. Let him try." Yates crumpled the letter in his fist. "This is Oklahoma territory, not Philadelphia society. Man threatens a woman here, especially another man's wife. He answers to more than some Eastern judge." She recognized the hard set of his features, the former cowboy and occasional outlaw emerging from beneath the merchant's civilized veneer. "Yates, no. Whatever you're thinking, I'm thinking no one threatens my family." He took her hands in his grip gentle despite the steel in his voice. "We have 3 weeks, plenty of time to prepare." "Prepare how? We can't fight him. His money, his influence can't touch us here." Yates's certainty never wavered. "Trust me, Penelope, he won't harm you again. That's a promise." Despite his assurances, fear followed Penelope through the days that followed. She started at every unfamiliar face entering the store, tensed at the sound of approaching horses, found herself unable to sleep for more than brief, nightmare-plagued intervals. Yates never left her side longer than absolutely necessary. He arranged for the shopkeeper's son from across the street to watch the store while he accompanied Penelope on necessary errands. At night, he held her close, murmuring reassurances when she woke gasping from dreams of pursuit and capture. 2 weeks after the letter's arrival, Yates announced they would ride to the land that afternoon. "Need fresh air," he insisted when Penelope hesitated. Can't keep hiding in the store. Make us both crazy before Blackwell even arrives." Reluctantly, she agreed. The ride west lifted her spirits, despite her anxiety. Spring had transformed the prairie into a sea of green dotted with wildflowers, meadowlarks singing from fence posts, the air sweet with new growth. As they approached their property, Penelope noticed something unexpected: a wagon parked near the spring, men moving purposefully across the rise where they had planned to build the house. "Yates, what's happening?" His smile held a touch of mischief. Surprise got started a bit earlier than planned. Drawing closer, she realized what she was seeing: foundation stones being laid, lumber stacked nearby, the beginning of their home taking shape on the land. Half a dozen men from town worked steadily under the direction of the local carpenter. "How? When did you arrange this?" she asked, amazed. "Been planning since winter. Wanted to surprise you on your birthday next month." He shrugged. "Figured now's as good a time as any, something to focus on besides waiting for trouble that may never come." The simple kindness, his determination to build their future even while shadows from her past threatened, broke something inside her. Tears spilled down her cheeks as Yates helped her from the saddle. "Hey now," he said gently, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "Thought you'd be pleased." "I am," she assured him. "It's just, I've been so afraid, thinking only of running again, of what we might lose, and here you are building anyway." He drew her close, resting his forehead against hers. "Always going to build with you, Penelope, no matter what comes." The men worked until sunset, making remarkable progress on the foundation. Riding back to town, Penelope felt something she hadn't experienced since the letter's arrival: hope, fragile but persistent, that perhaps Yates was right. Perhaps they could face whatever came and emerge stronger. That hope lasted until the following Tuesday, when a private railroad car arrived at Kingfisher Station, bearing the Blackwell Company logo on its polished side. Word reached the mercantile within minutes: a wealthy Easterner had arrived, asking directions to the main street, specifically to Olson's General Store. Yates immediately closed the shop, ushering Penelope upstairs to their apartment. "Stay here," he instructed, checking that the Derringer she still kept was loaded. "Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me, no matter what you hear." "Yates, please trust me," he kissed her fiercely. "Whatever happens, remember I love you." Then he was gone, boots sounding heavily on the stairs. Penelope locked the door as instructed, then moved to the window overlooking the street, heart pounding painfully against her ribs. She didn't have to wait long. A carriage stopped before the mercantile, an elegant conveyance incongruous among the wagons and saddle horses tethered along the street. The man who descended was exactly as she remembered: tall, impeccably dressed in the latest Eastern fashion, silver-haired and distinguished, his bearing that of someone accustomed to deference. Harold Blackwell, S.R., paused on the boardwalk, surveying the modest storefront with evident disdain. Then, straightening his silk waistcoat, he entered the mercantile. Penelope pressed her hand against the window glass, straining to hear what transpired below. For several long minutes, there was nothing but silence. Then, startlingly, laughter, not Yates's familiar warm chuckle, but a cold, derisive sound she recognized from countless Philadelphia society functions. The door opened, both men emerging onto the boardwalk. Blackwell was speaking, his tone dismissive though the words were indistinguishable. Yates stood with arms crossed, expression unreadable from her vantage point. Then Blackwell gestured imperiously toward the carriage, clearly expecting compliance with whatever demand he'd made. Yates's response was to shake his head once, definitively. Blackwell's face darkened. He stepped closer, saying something that made Yates's posture shift, subtly weight coming forward onto the balls of his feet, hands uncrossing to hang loose at his sides. Penelope recognized the stance from the single time she'd seen her husband confront a drunken cowboy, attempting to leave the store without paying. Heart in her throat, she fumbled with the window latch, finally forcing it open in time to hear Blackwell's voice, raised in anger, pathetic shopkeeper playing at being a man. "Stand aside. The girl belongs to me." Yates's reply was measured, carrying clearly in the sudden silence that had fallen over the street as townspeople paused to watch the confrontation. "Mrs. York belongs to herself, and she's chosen to build a life here with me." "A life?" Blackwell laughed harshly. "What sort of life can you offer her? Look at this." He gestured contemptuously at the store, barely a step above barbarism. "Penelope was raised for better, bred for it." "She's not a horse," Yates replied, his calm unshaken, "and she's made her choice clear." "I suggest you return to Philadelphia, Mr. Blackwell. There's nothing for you here." Blackwell's face contorted with rage. "Insolent pup! Do you have any idea who I am, what I can do to you, and this miserable excuse for a town? I know exactly who you are." Yates took a step forward, his voice dropping to a register Penelope had never heard, cold, implacable. "A coward who preys on vulnerable women, who marks them when they refuse his advances, who threatens rather than protects." Blackwell paled, then flushed dark red. "The girl shot me. I could have her arrested this instant. You could try." Yates gestured around the street where a crowd had gathered, the blacksmith with his hammer still in hand, the barber with his razor, shopkeepers and farmers and ranch hands all watching with hard eyes. "But I don't fancy your chances of leaving this town with her, or leaving at all, if these folks hear the full story." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Blackwell's face. He glanced around, seemingly registering the hostile audience his arrogance had attracted. When he spoke again, his voice had lowered to a hiss. "This isn't over." "It is," Yates contradicted flatly. "Here's how this ends. You get back in that fancy carriage, you board your private car, you return to Philadelphia, and you forget Penelope Mitchell ever existed. Or—" Blackwell challenged. Yates stepped closer, speaking too softly for Penelope to hear from her window. Whatever he said drained the remaining color from Blackwell's face. The older man stumbled backward, nearly falling before his driver rushed to steady him. Without another word, Blackwell allowed himself to be helped into the carriage. As it pulled away, he stared fixedly ahead, not once looking back at the mercantile or the crowd dispersing along the street. Penelope sagged against the window frame, legs suddenly unable to support her weight. Below, Yates exchanged words with several townsfolk before disappearing back into the store. Moments later, his steps sounded on the stairs, followed by his familiar knock. She unlocked the door with trembling hands. Yates stepped inside, gathering her into an embrace so tight it nearly stole her breath. "He's gone," he murmured against her hair, "and he won't be back." "How can you be sure?" she whispered, still unable to believe the confrontation she'd witnessed. Yates drew back slightly, cupping her face in his hands. "Because I reminded him that wealthy Easterners who venture west sometimes don't return. Tragic accidents happen in Indian territory." A grim smile touched his lips. "Suggested he might want to check if his life insurance is current before pressing his luck." "You threatened him," she said, half horrified, half amazed. "Promised him," Yates corrected. "Not the same thing. Besides, wasn't just me he had to worry about. Whole town was ready to run him out on a rail once word spread about what he'd done to you." Fresh tears welled in her eyes. "They know about my past. Know you survived something terrible. Know you're one of us now and we protect our own." He brushed a tear from her cheek. Details don't matter, Penelope. What matters is you're safe. He understands that coming after you again would be the last mistake he ever made. For the first time since the letter's arrival, Penelope allowed herself to truly believe it might be over the running, the fear, the constant looking over her shoulder. What happens now? Yates's expression softened, the dangerous edge fading from his eyes, replaced by the warmth she had come to cherish. Now, we finish building our house, plant that orchard, maybe start on that family we talked about. His thumbs traced gentle circles on her cheekbones. Live the life we choose, not one dictated by ghosts. That night, for the first time in weeks, Penelope slept deeply and dreamlessly, secure in her husband's arms. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in golden beams across their bed. Yates was already awake, watching her with an expression of such tenderness it made her heart constrict. "Good morning, beautiful." She touched his face, tracing the scar through his eyebrow that she had come to love as part of him. "Good morning, husband." "Thought we might ride out to the land today," he suggested. "Check progress on the foundation, maybe picnic by the spring." The simple domesticity of the suggestion returning to their plans, their future, filled her with quiet joy. "I'd like that very much." They spent the day at the property, Penelope sketching ideas for the interior layout while Yates discussed framing with the carpenter. By late afternoon, they had spread a blanket near the spring, sharing bread and cheese and early strawberries Widow Jenkins had sent along. "It's really happening," Penelope marveled, watching swallows dart above the partially completed foundation. "Our home should be ready by harvest," Yates confirmed, just in time. Something in his tone caught her attention. "In time for what?" His smile turned mysteriously pleased. "Winter. Cold weather, whatever comes next." She studied his face, noting the barely contained excitement behind his casual demeanor. "Yates York, what aren't you telling me?" He feigned innocence poorly. "Don't know what you mean." "You're a terrible liar, husband, one of my many charming qualities." He took her hand, suddenly serious. "Had the doctor stopped by the store yesterday while you were helping Mrs. Jenkins with her mending?" Alarm shot through her. "Are you ill? Why didn't you say something?" "Not ill." His smile bloomed fully. "Wanted to confirm something before telling you." Didn't want to raise hopes unnecessarily. Understanding dawned slowly, then all at once. Penelope's free hand moved instinctively to her abdomen. "You mean?" Yates nodded, joy radiating from him like heat from a stove. "Doc says you're about 2 months along. Baby should arrive around Christmas." "A child," she whispered, the reality of it washing over her in waves. "Our child. First of many if you're willing." He drew her into his arms. "Our family, Penelope, the one nobody can take from us." She buried her face against his shoulder, overcome. After everything, loss, betrayal, fear, flight, this gift seemed almost too precious to be believed. Yet here it was, life taking root within her, promising continuation, legacy, hope. "I love you," she said against his shirt, words inadequate for the emotion expanding within her chest. "So much that sometimes I can't breathe with it." His arms tightened around her. "Good thing I'm planning to be around for the next 50 years or so to remind you to breathe." The future stretched before them, bright with possibility, a house rising on the gentle slope, children running through tall grass, seasons passing in the eternal cycle of planting and harvest. Not without challenges, certainly, but faced together, scars acknowledged but no longer defining either of them. 50 years, Penelope agreed, lifting her face to his. "At minimum." His kiss tasted of strawberries and promises kept, of dangers faced and overcome, of love patient enough to heal even the deepest wounds. As the prairie wind whispered through new grass around them, Penelope Mitchell York once frightened prey. now beloved wife and mother, to be finally embrace the truth she had resisted for so long. Some scars were indeed worth loving, for they mapped not just past pain but the journey toward healing and the precious, imperfect hearts that found each other along the way.